Hello and welcome to the Desert Kings Falconry Podcast. I do want to say before we get this thing started that this first episode is kind of a combination podcast with Wilderness Wonders and Desert Kings Falconry. For Desert Kings Falconry, of course, this is episode 1, and there will be more to come. So without further ado, let's get this episode started. All right, well, welcome to the Wilderness Wonders podcast. This is a pretty special episode today. I'm really excited today because we are partnering up with Desert Kings Falconry for the next few episodes. And with me today, I have Desert Kings Falconry's founder. His name is Bladen Benson. Bladen is a master falconer out in the state of Arizona. So we're really excited to include him here in the Wilderness Wonders podcast and again for the next few episodes. But let's go ahead and start with you, Bladen. Do you mind introducing yourself to us today?
Yeah, Bladen Benson, Master Falconer. Love that title. You know? Here in Arizona, I've been practicing falconry now for, let's see here, 7, 8, 9 years, coming up on 10. Actually practicing falconry, I should say. I was practicing when I was a little bit younger. Didn't have a license necessarily. I was just with my grandfather while he was doing all that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, here we are.
Awesome. Also, when I met you, I was shocked to find out how old you are. Do you mind telling the audience how old you are?
I'm only 23.
Only 23 and already a master falconer. That is awesome. So you started falconry when you as soon as you possibly could, right?
We found out about falconry when I was 10 years old. Found an injured kestrel on the ground. Took it to a wildlife rehab. They said, hey, we're just going to put it down. My grandfather, who's 6'5", military man, hardest man you'll ever meet, and he was like, no, we're going to take care of this thing. So we ended up just falling in love with it. You know, me being at the time, I was in love with the animals. I had my turtles, I had my reptiles, and I kind of just stumbled upon falconry, learning how to take care of this bird of prey. We knew it was a bird of prey. And it took off from there, and immediately we were like, we need to do this. We need to be able to hunt with a wild bird of prey going out there. What could be more awesome than that?
That's a pretty cool start.
It's a good start.
Yeah.
It was.
Not very many people get to have the hands-on experience first and then get into falconry. I think that's kind of unique that you had that.
I wasn't old enough. So here in the state of Arizona, you had to be, at the time, in 2010, you had to be 14 to legally get your apprenticeship. So for the next 3 years, and I say 3 years because I was 10, they eventually changed that age to 12. I happened to be 13 when I was legally allowed to get that license. But from 10 years old onward, my grandfather, him being 60, he was able to get a bird. So I had my first 3 years experience with a red tail. Just helping him out, training that red tail when he was gone, helping feeding it, making sure it was taken care of, going out in the fields with him, hunting rabbits, having a good time. And then I was able to get my license, and my first bird was a Harris hawk. And that's what we started with.
Well, awesome. It sounds like you had a really cool start to your falconry career. Although speaking of careers, earlier I mentioned that you're a part of Desert Kings Falconry. You mind telling me what Desert Kings Falconry is?
Desert Kings Falconry is a falconry-based bird control company here in Arizona where we use hawks and falcons as well as pneumatic air cannons to remove birds of any kind, really, legally, of course. So we do a lot of pigeon work. We do a little bit of collared dove work, and then we use the hawks to scare and abate grackles, crows, any birds that are kind of messing with areas out here in Arizona.
So are pigeons really that big of a problem here?
They're a huge problem. Huge problem. And as you've seen, working with us and along this this trial we've been having you on, they can cause some serious damage, serious health problems, property damage, just because it looks bad. I mean, you go to some of these properties, poop all over the sides of these buildings, drippings, droppings on the fresh white paint that they just did. I mean, it looks bad. You can tell it's like, oh, is this a bad part of town? You're like, no, this is Scottsdale, but they just have a bird problem. They've had it for a while.
Yeah, I have noticed an abnormal. I mean, I'm coming from Utah, and so out in Utah there are pigeons, but there aren't nearly as many as there are in Arizona, or at least that kind of mesa up into Scottsdale, this area. There's so many pigeons.
I think that's due to the fact that we got the warm weather here. It doesn't really get that cold in the wintertime. We do have a couple freezing days, but they can breed basically all year. They can probably breed 10 months out of the year. 4 clutches in 1 month, 4 babies each clutch. I mean, you take a pair of pigeons, that's 8 more pigeons in just 1 month, 16 more the next month. I mean, that's just an insane number.
They reproduce so fast. That is crazy. Yeah. So you went from being a falconer or just barely getting introduced to falconry when you're 10 years old all the way up to starting and owning your own abatement company. Let's go ahead and rewind back to what we were just chatting about earlier and kind of your whole beginning part of it. So you had this kestrel. What happened to that kestrel?
It had a broken wing. We found it. So we found her at the Springerville Airport in Arizona. That's up north, up in the high mountains. She had a broken wing. It was pretty visible. We bound the wing as best we could. We didn't get her veterinary attention because I think legally at the time we weren't allowed to have it. And we had her in this rather large parrot cage. It was pretty good size in the living room. She was just a cute little thing. She would hop from perch to perch. Like she couldn't fly, so she would just hop back and forth, perch to perch. If she fell, we'd just help her back up. Her name was Shorty. She was a female kestrel. Cute little thing. We ended up after the 6 months. My grandfather, he's very much into wildlife. Needs to be wildlife. It needs to stay that way. And so you don't want to keep these birds forever, right? She wasn't quite able to fly. The wing kind of healed in a different way. She was able to flap and kind of glide a little bit. We ended up taking her back up where we found her, away from the airport, of course, letting her go in a lake where there was grasshoppers everywhere. You could see the snakes and lizards running around. And we just left her there. She probably didn't make it, but we gave her that good step of like, you know what? If nature's going to happen, let's help out, and we're going to get you back out there. And that's what kind of just started that journey for us into learning about what falconry is, how can we actually practice it, and how can we get into something so cool. So when I first started it, falconry was just something fun that I wanted to do.
Awesome. When did your grandpa start getting into falconry?
He was in his 60s in 2010. That's when he was legally allowed to do it, and I was just his helper at the time.
How long after that kestrel experience was he able to obtain the license?
Probably a year. It was close to a year because we started finding out about Arizona Falconers. Went out to Ben Avery shooting range where they had this big outdoor expo every year, and the Arizona Falconers were there. We met Jerry Oshwinkle, hell of a guy, and then we met Matt Hankin, our sponsor, who eventually became my sponsor and my grandfather's sponsor. He took us out and had some of the most amazing falconry experiences with that guy. But it took us so long because we just wanted to make sure we studied, made sure we had the correct facilities. My grandfather, he went above and beyond. I mean, we had like the most immaculate facilities for the longest time, like insulated outdoor mews for these birds with heat lamps. And like we went the extra mile even though we didn't have to. So it took a while, but he ended up a year later getting the bird. First bird was a red tail, an immature male red tail named Shaka. That's what we ended up naming him.
What was Shaka like?
He was a hard-ass bird. We ruined him, 100% for sure. Ruined that bird. He was footy. I remember my grandfather was gone for like a couple of days. He's like, "Hey, Bladen, watch the bird." I was 11 at the time, so I put the bird on crayons. I was flying him back and forth to the glove. I had a bag of meat in my hand. I didn't have it in like a pouch or anything, and I thought I was hiding it really well. And I went to scratch my face, and I had the bag of meat in my hand. And I remember him coming in. I didn't see him, and he grabbed the bag of meat with my cheek in it. And I don't know. I have a beard right now, so you can't really see it. But I have a scar right here where the talon actually went into my cheek, and like I was just sitting there with the bird hanging from my face, and like just had him like a fistful of my face. And my grandma came out. She's like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And I was like, "I don't know what to do." And she's like, "Take a piece of meat out, throw it on the ground." So I threw a piece of meat on the ground, and like he jumped down. I was like blood all over my face, and I remember just being like traumatized. I remember going inside in my room in their house, and I just like sat there in the dark and like started crying a little bit. I was like, "What just happened, man?"
Well, I'm glad that experience didn't stop you from learning more.
It made me mad. It made me want to like keep going. I'm like, why did I do that? Like, what did I do wrong? How can I fix it? So I was like, kind of like, you know, when the background music starts playing, you're like, I gotta fix this. Like, what the fuck can I do now? And like, keep going. You know,
and training montage starts.
Yeah, basically, that bird, first bird. You always remember your first bird. You always do. Ruin him for sure. He caught a couple rabbits. He probably only caught 10 to 15 rabbits maybe his first season with us, which I guess for an apprentice starting out, that's pretty good.
It's pretty normal, yeah.
You're catching stuff. Like, you're getting into it, you're catching stuff. And we ended up letting him go at the end of the season before summer hit. And we came back to him probably like a month or two later just to see if he was still there. And he was. Like, he was still there. Tossed a rabbit head to him. He came down. Like, he came down to it. Like, he knew, like, what it was. He didn't let us get too close, but he came down on the rabbit head we threw. We probably did that a couple times because we let him go in this. It was way out there in the desert. It was a neighborhood that I ended up living in, but it was kind of secluded. So we let him go in that neighborhood. Rabbits everywhere. Came back, and we would just kind of toss him food every now and again. Eventually, just kind of didn't see him anymore. You know, maybe he migrated, did whatever. We didn't see him again. But you always remember that first bird.
It was awesome. That's kind of like you and your grandpa's first bird there.
Oh,
and that was even before you even had a license. You were already kind of getting that apprentice experience. By the time you got a license, would you say it was at age 13?
I was 13. He was like right around that age.
And then for your first bird, like your personal bird, what kind of hawk was that?
Well, we had Shaka, who was a red tail. I helped my grandpa train him. And then we got Isabel, who was another red tail. And then I got my license. And so I was like, you know what? I've worked with red tails. Maybe not my own. I could say it was my own. But I was like, oh, let's go to Harris Hawk. Because this, right when I got my license, and you can thank Jerry Oshwinkle for this, they all fought for apprentices to have Harris Hawks. At the time, as an apprentice, you could not have a Harris Hawk. Which, to anyone listening to this now and who's a falconer, would be like, that's insane. Like, why did they not give Harris Hawks to apprentices? So right when I turned 13, got my license, I was able to get a Harris Hawk. It was like right at the same time. It was when the regulations changed. And I started to realize in my falconry experience why they didn't let apprentices have Harris Hawks, because they're too easy. Like, you almost don't learn from them because they're so easy. They forgive you for your mistakes. You can do whatever you want with them, and they're like, okay, I'll do it. You know, you want to hunt out of a car window? Sure, I'll do it. You want to hunt off of an 18-foot pole in the middle of the field? Sure, I'll do it, man. Like, I'll do whatever you want me to. But
it's like the only thing that you need to do to have a Harris Hawk be successful is just to take them out hunting, and that's about it. And they'll be successful.
You just got to take them out. You don't have to do anything. Just sit with them. They come to your glove 3 feet away, like, all right, it's ready to go. Like, you can just take them out. They're good.
That's also what makes them so great at the same time.
There's just a less of a learning curve, I guess you could say, with a Harris Hawk. Needless to say, amazing birds. For sure the best bird to use for falconry if you know what you're doing. Even if you don't know what you're doing, they're a good bird. But I got an immature male Harris Hawk out in Tucson named Apollo. On that same day, we also caught his immature sister, Athena. So we actually hunted those two. I got to hunt with my grandfather. And like, that's why I'm so close to them now, is we just hunted. That's all we did. We went out with the birds, hunted with these two birds, and they worked so amazing as a team. I mean, like, there's some just crazy stories I have with hunting these two birds over the next, I'd say, 3 years. I mean, just crazy stuff that you'd just be like, what? Like, that happened? You know, like, it's crazy.
That's awesome. So you loved them so much, you flew them for 3 years. In that 3 years, what memory kind of stands out to you most?
So in those 3 years, my bird actually died the first year. So Athena's brother, my bird, died, but we ended up still hunting Athena for the next 2 to 3 years. What I remember the most, the partnership between two Harris Hawks hunting. If you can do it well, and it usually takes more than one person to do it, just because each person needs to have their own bird, it is the most amazing thing to watch. I mean, it's a sight to behold. So we would go out, like, one story in particular sticks in my head. We'd go out to an abandoned neighborhood that stopped building in 2008. You know, they still had rebuilt it. Full sagebrush. They had some of the walls up, some of the paved streets. That was it. And, you know, a lot of falconers in Arizona, they're going to know what field I'm talking about. I was over there in Gilbert, Arizona. And we all hunted it for a long time. I was out there with my grandfather. We had Athena and Apollo with us. We're sitting there. My grandfather gets a phone call. And he's sitting there just kind of, you know, lollygagging, talking on the phone. We have two of our hawks on a big block wall. And I hit this bush just because I'm bored. You know, I'm only like 13 at the time, just a little kid. Hit this bush. 2 rabbits run out at the same time, 2 cottontails. Both birds take off after their cottontails. Each one grabs a separate cottontail right next to each other. I mean, like 3 feet apart. Grandpa, he's not even paying attention. He's just sitting on the phone, you know, picking his ass. He's just sitting there. I'm just like 13 years old. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Goes, catches these 2 rabbits, and they kind of go for a rabbit rodeo, you know, where the rabbit's just kicking like wild. Even for cottontails, I mean, they go sometimes. And the birds end up just kind of splitting off. And my grandfather turns around, he's like, hey, where'd the birds go? And I'm like, they're both, I don't know what to do. So like I ran to my bird, he ran to his bird, we found them, and we doubled on that day. Like at the same time. Like it was great. Well, I guess you wouldn't say it doubled, but we caught 2 rabbits at the same time. Boom.
That's double. Yeah,
I guess
that's pulling off a double.
It was freaking awesome. Like I just remember vividly watching that. I'm like, oh my god.
Most people don't normally pull off a double in that way, but it's a double.
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, it was just amazing time. Like, and we had a lot of those. Same field. Probably a month later, we're walking with both birds in this little ditch, and my bird Apollo jumps off the T-perch we have for him. The long 18-foot pole that sits over your head. I'm like, where'd the bird go? So he went behind me. I couldn't hear his bells anymore. I didn't see him. And I was like, oh, it's a quick flight. We like searched for a good 5-10 minutes. And all of a sudden I heard like the faintest rabbit scream. For those of you who don't know, when you catch a rabbit with a hawk, they scream. And whether it's out of pain or just frightened, they scream. And it kind of sounds like a kid. So it's kind of weird.
It's a little eerie.
Yeah, it's a little eerie the first time hearing it.
Every time I've taken somebody out hawking rabbits, I have to warn them.
Yeah.
So that they can kind of mentally prepare for it.
And even then, they don't mentally prepare for how much it sounds like a little kid screaming. It's like,
yeah,
it is like, oh my gosh.
It is really eerie.
It
really is. And it takes some time getting used to. So I totally understand anybody first time hearing it being kind of off put by the noise.
They're like, oh no, it's terrible. Well, that's just what they do.
Yeah.
Anyway, like I end up hearing this rabbit faintly scream, and I'm like, okay, that's close, but it sounds far away. What's going on? I end up kind of walking 20 feet behind me where I thought he flew. There was a hole that a coyote had dug, and the rabbit had gone in there. He went head first in that hole. He went so far. I mean, I really had to like reach in. Hawk only had the back legs. He was just going to sit there and wait for it to like basically exhaust itself. I end up just seeing his little head kind of poke up out of the hole, and I'm like, dude, what are you doing, man? Like reach in there and pull him out. He's got I think it was a baby jackrabbit, like a little baby jackrabbit that he ended up pulling out. And it was just like, he was like in that hole. I mean, like he was a little bird. I mean, he only flew at like 490 grand. Like he was a little Harris hawk. And he pulled it off.
I don't, Harris hawks have been the only one that I've seen do that. Like go after rabbits down a hole.
They'll do it.
I don't think I've seen any other hawks do that. If any of you guys have a hawk that does go down rabbit holes that aren't Harris hawks, let us know and share your story, by the way. I'd love to hear it.
Awesome to hear.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. That's some pretty awesome experiences so far. You're only 13 at that point.
13.
Right? 13
yeah, I'm probably only like 3 months into falconry at that point.
Wow.
It kind of was a slow start. Like, I mean...
it doesn't feel like it.
Well,
it sounds like you hit the ground running.
Well, when you start falconry and you get your first bird, you're out every day.
That's true.
You're every day for like 3 hours. I just remember being out every day for 3 hours, like for the first month. I'm like, I'm not getting anything. Mm-hmm. And you start to learn as you do falconry to set up slips and to figure out if you hit this bush, which way is the rabbit going to go, or where can I put my bird? Well, I didn't know that at the time. We're still fairly new at this.
So much of falconry is your field craft.
Oh yeah. And so I just remember being like super down the first month, and then it's always that one day where you set up the perfect slip for your bird. And I remember being at an airport neighborhood and had a big airport strip in it. I used to live there. And we were up against this corner of a wall, hit this bush, and I scared the rabbit right towards my hawk and saw the hawk, veered off to the left, and my hawk went right after it, boom, slammed it. After that day, I mean, that was one of the best birds I've ever had. Unfortunately, he did die that year, but it connected right there, like in his brain. He flipped, the switch flipped, and he was like, okay, I know what I'm doing right now. And then from there on, dude, I mean, that was the only male Harris hawk I've ever had catch jackrabbits on his own, and he wouldn't let the females jump on the kill with him. Only male Harris hawk I've ever had do that. It's just an amazing bird. Amazing first year for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience with myself as well, catching the first rabbit with a hawk. It's
You'll never forget it.
You never forget it.
You never forget it.
It gives me chills just thinking about it, too. Even hearing you explain yours kind of takes me back to my experience as well. About how many birds have you flown since you've begun falconry, you think?
Probably flown close to 25.
25? Since
the start of falconry. Owning an abatement company, I mean, you get to fly a lot of birds. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just kind of like rotate birds out every year. So that is part of it, but I've done falconry or I should say abatement falconry for other companies. So I've gotten to fly gyr falcons, peregrine falcons, oplomatos. I've gotten to fly red tails of my own, mostly hair socks. Most of those birds that I've flown are hair socks. I've gotten to fly 6 Cooper's hawks, none of which I was successful with, but we'll get there. You know, I've gotten to fly 2 goshawks.
What were they like?
Hardest bird ever worked with. And for those of you who don't know me, or for those of you who do, I have 2 kids now and 2 twins on the way. So for me to fly goshawk is like not in the picture right now. I mean, you need every moment of your time to fly one of those birds. Even the masters I know who fly them are just like 24/7 when it's hunting season. No, I'm flying my goss. Like we're catching ducks on Monday, jackrabbits on Tuesday, and a covey of quail on Wednesday. And if we miss any single one of those slips, that bird's attacking me in the face. And, we need to go home. So I just don't have the time for that right now.
That's all right. I think that's really smart. Making sure that the species that you have, you actually are able to handle. Or at least have the time to do it.
Yeah, you have to have the time.
Absolutely.
And that's where hair socks come in, where it's much easier. Because you don't necessarily have to fly them every day like most birds would. You should, although... But you can get away with flying, 3 or 4 days a week, only an hour at a time, and you'll still be successful flying them. And they'll be happy, they'll be chilling in their cage, just waiting to go out the next day. Like they don't need any more than that.
I think what's grown in popularity a lot more right now is urban falconry. It seems like a lot of falconers are moving a little bit away from going out in the middle of the desert or the middle of the forest, and we're starting to get a little bit closer into the city because it's where the game's at. It's where a lot of games at. Like here in Arizona, if you want to hunt pigeons, you're not going to hunt them out in the desert. You're gonna have to come to the city to get them.
And that's actually where our company takes off. Is because I didn't have enough time to fly hawks every day, even though I wanted to, and I still ended up doing it. I just did it a different way. And I love the urban falconry. And, for falconers that know me, they know that. I mean, you know that. That's all I do is urban falconry. I don't have time to go out, drive an hour to Casa Grande and go hunt jackrabbits in this massive 3-mile across field. Like, I just don't have time for that, man. Even though it's fun, and I enjoyed doing that when I first started. I like my little cottontails in my neighborhoods and my side ditches where I can throw the bird out, catch a couple, dove, maybe pigeon, and just have a good time. Like, that's just the stuff I do. And that's how we started the company. It was... In high school, I didn't have time to go out during the daytime every day and fly my hawk. Well, I was still super passionate, even through high school and doing everything I was doing, about flying birds and falconry. I ended up taking my hawks out at nighttime. And I'd go probably Monday through Thursday, 2 hours every night. I'd go out with a buddy or a girlfriend, go hunt, go spotlight some rabbits. The birds would just chase them down for half a mile because they don't even know what's happening. Boom, catch a rabbit. We'd catch 5, 6 rabbits a night and just have a freaking blast on golf courses or open alfalfa fields. That's just what we did. And then I started learning you can hunt with hair socks at nighttime. You can do it. You can do it quite successfully.
Why do you even need an owl? Just use it. Yeah, just use a hair sock.
Owl, man. You don't need that. You just need a nice light and a good hawk that's going to listen to you.
Absolutely.
That's all you need.
Yeah, night hawking is great. So what was your first abatement? Well, actually, before we get into abatement, can you explain real quick what abatement is?
Abatement is falconry-based
abatement.
The word abatement is to get rid of or to remove. So you can do weed abatement where you remove weeds and plants.
So I guess today we're talking about falconry-based
abatement. Yes, falconry-based abatement is where you're using a captive bred and trained bird of prey to harass, scare, or take wildlife. That is the definition of abatement. And that's what we do. We harass, we scare, and we take game with captive bred birds of prey. That's what we do out here.
That's awesome. So what was your first falconry-based abatement job? Or I guess your first encounter with it. Maybe it's not. I don't know if yours is a job or if it was like...
No, my first encounter with it was a job. Introduced to me by a well-known falconer, I'd say in the U.S. His name's, I call him JoJo. His name's Joseph Provanviancom. He's a great kid. He's around my age, a couple of years older. And that's why we got along so well. It's just because there's not a lot of young kids you see doing this, especially at the time when I joined. So running into him at some of the meets, he was doing what I was doing. He was going to supermarkets, car hawking his bird, just getting some training in. He goes, hey, man, I have this awesome job where I go to resorts and I scare birds with my hawk. I get paid to do that. He's like, you should check it out. So I go out with him one day. Freaking out a blast. We're out there just chasing grackle around. Occasional cottontail would pop up. Boom, his bird catch a cottontail. I'm like, dude, you get paid to do this? He's like, yeah, man. We're talking to cute girls and all these resorts. And I'm like, like everyone's always impressed. You got a hawk on your arm. Like, you want to come pet my hawk, man? And that's how I got introduced to it. And I ended up doing work for a company called Falcon Force. That was my first experience with abatement. And Falcon Force is mainly based out of Oregon and Washington area, where they're doing blueberry and cherry abatement, where they're taking falcons out in these huge orchards of farmland, scaring off mostly starlings and sparrows. But they also do a little bit of work here in Arizona and California as well, just chasing off seagulls or crows or blackbirds away from dining areas where there's guests or people outside, where these animals have taken advantage of the fact that there's a lot of food around.
I had the chance to do some abatement on seagulls in Monterey.
I'm jealous.
California, and it was a lot of fun.
That sounds like I've never done that. That sounds like a blast. Like I wish we had contracts.
Oh, and the weather was beautiful the whole
sure
time.
I'm sure it was, man.
It wasn't blazing hot.
You joined our company at the wrong time, man. You came in at like May or June. I think it was May.
Just hot.
Dude, it was just like 105, 110 out.
Yeah.
Arizona has a lot of cottontail. Like I like brag about that.
It is.
You got a lot.
Yeah, you guys are really lucky to be able to have this much cottontail, because in most of the United States, especially Western United States, especially
got my dog in here. Sorry.
Yeah, especially in the Western United States, you have so much more rabbits here than everywhere else. Because the rabbit hemorrhage disease just kind of went through most of the West and took so much of them out. But it seems like so many of the cottontails thrive so well in this urban environment. They've stayed somewhat separated from the rest of the wild population.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's almost like it naturally quarantined them.
Yeah.
And they weren't really affected by the hemorrhage disease.
You have these huge pockets of cottontail, like in urban environments. So neighborhoods, for example, neighborhoods that had rabbits in it to begin with, then they built on them. Well, those rabbits didn't leave. Why would they leave? There's green grass, berries everywhere, fruit falling off trees that they planted there, but they're cut off by huge intersections of roads. So you don't have one rabbit jumping across a field, going to this other group of rabbits that are over here and spreading this disease out.
Yeah, so they kind of like naturally quarantine themselves. Mm-hmm. I think it makes it a little unique here, but just for everybody else, any other falconers listen to this, that's actually not true. No. There's no rabbits here.
There's no rabbits here, so you don't want to come out here. Actually, I could tell probably every falconer in this state of Arizona where we hunt, and none of them would hunt it. Most falconers are very traditional, and they want to stick to that. A big open field with the big long slips. Most falconers... 90% of falconers would never hunt what I hunt. I mean, we hunt right alongside residential houses. We hunt right alongside dogs walking on trails, major intersections with big trucks and cars running around everywhere. That's stuff I love. I live off of that stuff.
When it does come to cottontail, I don't notice a huge difference between catching a cottontail out in the middle of the desert and a hawk catching a cottontail in the city. The flight is roughly the same. I think when it comes to something more like a jackrabbit, the flight's different because there are no jackrabbits in the city. Yeah. So the flight is definitely different. But cottontails is mostly the same. They really like to kind of stick between each. They really like to stick between each bush, and they kind of zigzag between bush and bush and bush, and then they'll kind of try to sneak out at the right moment when the hawk's either not looking or just far enough away, or if the dog's working the bush. A lot of times that rabbit will try to scoot around on the other side and then fake it out. They're really intelligent animals, and it makes them such a worthy quarry.
It's funny because it doesn't even matter if the neighbor's feeding the rabbits. The moment that rabbit sees a hawk or knows that you're hunting it, it flips the switch. The thing's just like, no, I'm not getting caught today. They got their, it doesn't matter if you're in an open field or in an urban environment, they have their bursts of running and then they stop and find a bush. It doesn't change. There's bushes in all these neighborhoods, right? So they'll go, boom, they'll shoot 50 yards, 100 yards, hit a bush, stop. Then you go reflush that rabbit. And more often than not, the birds miss. I mean, they're just going bush to bush to bush. I mean, there's more bushes, I would say, in these neighborhoods than there are out in an open field in the desert. I mean, there's just, there are thicker bushes too.
A higher concentration, allowing to give your hawk a lot more chances at game as well. Yeah. So they learn way faster because they're having so many opportunities. Your first abatement job was at a resort here in Arizona?
Yeah, it was a resort in Scottsdale. The Phoenician is the one I worked at. Very, very nice, very famous and popular resort. A lot of celebrities stay at. And there still is a falconer there with that same company. That's just not us. But that was my first experience with it. It was a hell of an experience. It really was.
That's awesome. What were you, I guess, abating at the Phoenician?
Boat-tailed grackles. You know, you can call them crows, even though they're not crows. Most people just know them as crows. They're just mid-sized blackbirds that are super smart. They know patterns, they know routines, they can recognize faces, they know when the food comes out, they know when it goes away, they know when you're there, when you're not there. They're a formidable enemy to try to remove. I mean, we're still trying to figure out the best possible way to get these guys away from the area. You'll almost never catch one. Every now and again you will. I mean, you have experience with some of the hawks, landing some lucky shots, but
it's pretty rare. They're really smart.
It is rare. They're smart.
Really smart.
They're fast. They're maneuverable. I mean, they'll break the ankles on a hawk mid-flight like nothing you've seen. And, Harris hawks not being bird catchers like they are, it's really difficult for them sometimes to land a good kill shot. But they're hard to remove. They are definitely difficult, and you get this unspoken hate when you see them. Anywhere else, even if you're not working, you just look at one, you're like, I don't like you. Like, I hate you.
I think one of the funniest things I learned about grackle that play into so much of what a grackle is they're corvid, right? I believe they're corvid.
Actually,
I'll have to look that up.
They're not.
Maybe they're not.
Because a corvid would include a crow.
Yeah.
I've been told they're not part of that family.
They're not part of that family.
Know.
Okay. I'll have to look that up later.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put it in the description if I find out, or maybe if somebody knows, go ahead and put it in a comment for us. But they look similar to crows. I've described them before as a miniature crow, so people can identify them really easy. Mm-hmm. But a group of crows they call a
mob, right?
No, murder.
Right?
Murder. Do you remember that?
Oh,
so group of crows.
Right, huh?
Group of crows they call a murder. But a group of grackles, do you remember what they call a group of grackles?
I don't.
A plague.
A plague?
Yeah.
Oh,
so
if
it's
you have
so it's so funny.
Too, that's not a joke. I mean, if you have 20 grackle in a plague, right? If you have a 20 grackle in a group, dude, they're causing some mayhem.
They really
I have
are.
physically seen a grackle come down. 2-year-old was holding a cookie in his hand. Freaking snabs the cookie out of this little kid's hand. The kid was frightened and just started crying. The thing just flew off his cookie. Like, he didn't knock.
Oh yeah, they'll still fries right out of your hand. A plague of grackle, and it's so funny because it really plays into their population numbers here. They thrive so much on human development that there's so many of them that they've ended up becoming somewhat of a sanitary issue in a lot of the dining areas here. So
100%.
So it seems like they affect mostly resorts, like the first one that you were at, right?
They love those resorts because there's always people eating outside. I mean, that's like the aesthetic to eating at a resort, right? You get outside, getting that beautiful nature that this resort has. But you'll also find them, especially in Phoenix and Scottsdale areas, any outdoor dining area you go to, they're everywhere. And you could ask any restaurant manager or restaurant owner in the state of Arizona, they know exactly what we're talking about. They're bad.
Yeah, they're everywhere, man. So did you mostly stick to working at resorts from that point on, or were you able to go and practice other forms of falconry-based abatement?
Let's see here. I worked at the Phoenician with Falcon Force. And if I'm being honest, I got in trouble working there. So I ended up losing that job. I was grateful to lose that job, actually, because it pushed me to another company out here in Arizona, Sonora Desert Falconry. And that's when it started opening up really big for me with different forms of abatement. I was still flying my own personal birds at night. I ended up going and working for this resort. I got there really early one day. I was just walking around. I loved sipping on some coffee, walking through the resort, kind of enjoying myself before my shift started. I looked up one day because a pigeon pooped on my hat. I looked up and I noticed there was 10 pigeons sleeping in the rafters of one of the dining areas at this resort. Scottsdale Fairmont Princess. That's where we were. And I had Tony on my hand.
Who's Tony?
Tony Hawk. Tony Hawk's the man, the myth, the legend. I should say he's a bird. He started the company, really. He was the first bird and the only bird we had for the longest time. And he is the first Harris Hawk that I started flying at night. He was my first experience with all that. But Tony looks up. We're underneath this rafter in this dining area. And, man, he started to look. He had that death look in his eyes. I mean, he was looking up at those pigeons. He knew exactly what he was looking at. So I took a light out of my back pocket to make sure he could see a little bit better. Boom, flew up, murdered this pigeon. Just brought it down, and I was in awe because I would say most falconers, even people who don't practice falconry, to teach a bird of prey to look up at prey is one of the hardest things you can do. Like for that first couple of months, trying to train them to do what they do. I mean, they're an apex predator. They're looking down at mice. They're looking down at rabbits. They're looking down at birds when they're up in the sky on a pole.
You're asking them to go against their natural instinct.
They don't look. Why would they look up?
Yeah.
There's no reason to look up other than to see the big airplane that you're about to fly into.
Maybe to keep an eye out for an eagle. Maybe. That's pretty much it.
Maybe. There's no other reason to really look up. When he started doing that, and he kind of taught himself, and I would go back out to the same little rafter by his dining area. We caught all the pigeons in that area. And I went, okay, hold on a second. Could I do this for commercial properties, for residential properties, and make a huge difference? Because when you're trying to chase pigeons down with a hawk during the day, especially a Harris hawk, you're more than likely not going to catch them. Just a flight against a Harris hawk and a pigeon is not going to happen. Pigeons are like 4 times as fast as a Harris hawk. So everyone has this idea that, Harris hawk is going to frighten the pigeon and scare that pigeon off forever. That pigeon's never going to come back because it knows it's getting hunted. That is further from the truth than anyone could be telling you. That is such a lie. That pigeon's going to fly away and come back at night because it knows that hawk's not there anymore. And it's going to continue crapping everywhere and still leaving a mess behind. So I was trying to figure out, hey, how can we actually make a difference using the hawks? I cleared out that dining area, and I had the maintenance guys coming up to me. They're like, dude, what the heck did you do? Like, we don't have to spray crap off in the mornings anymore for the guests get here. It's amazing. And I'm like, you haven't had any pigeons back? And then I started to research pigeons, homing pigeons. Like the whole homing pigeon, you let the pigeon go, it goes back home. Well, that's what these pigeons do. They go back to the same spot every single night until they die. And that's what we did. We removed them. And there was no more. And that's kind of when it opened a huge door for me. And I'm like, okay, there's something else we could be doing. And, I enjoyed my time with this company at these resorts. And I thought, you know what? I need to be doing something else. Before I started thinking that way, I was just a younger kid at the time. I was probably 18, just in college. I wasn't liking college. I ended up running into this beautiful girl at a football game against my high school. It was her rival high school against mine. We were enemies forever. I ended up running into this beautiful girl who ended up being my wife, and we ended up getting pregnant pretty soon, pretty young. And it's like that snap of like, I'm going to have a kid, and I need to find an income in order to take care of that child and take care of my wife. So she ended up pushing me to start this business. But before that happened, I found out I was going to have a kid. I ran into Raul Ramirez. He's in Washington. He owns Inca Falconry, and they do agricultural abatement for cherries and blueberries out in Washington area. So I ended up taking that job for 36 straight days. Probably the best 36 days I've ever had. And it was just like me flying Aplamados, flying Harris Hawks, flying peregrine falcons out in these blueberry fields, just catching birds all day long. That's like all we did. For 15 straight hours, every day for 36 days, all I did was fly.
It was mostly starlings, right?
It was starlings and sparrows. That was mostly what it was. Hell of a time. You start flying those Aplamados, and for anyone who doesn't know what an Aplamato is, it's basically a Harris Hawk that got shrunk down to dwarf size and is a falcon. Like, that's what they are.
They're the most adorable. I think they're one of the Aplamato falcon and the American kestrel. I think are the cutest looking birds of prey ever. They're
but
so
don't
adorable.
Take it for granted, man. They will destroy what they see. I mean, those Apamatos were just destroying starlings. I mean, like,
awesome.
they would go catch one, rip its head off, go stash it, and I'd be like, come on, buddy. And they'd go freaking 7 more that day. I actually got in trouble at one point because they thought I was shooting all the birds. Because I had a pile of dead starlings and like my little I call it my special corner. It's like where I like kept all my trophy birds for that like piece of property I was at.
Yeah.
I got in trouble because like my boss and the owner of the land was like, you can't shoot birds out here. You can't be doing this. And I'm like, I don't know what you do. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just that's the birds
They
doing
caught
that,
so
man. Like
many
they
birds.
caught so many.
Because they were they asking that because
They're like, why do
they
you
would
have a-
stash them, right?
Oh, dude, I had like 200 starlings piled in a corner. And like fresh ones and rotting ones over the course of 36 days. And why I didn't throw them away? I don't know. I think I was just, having fun in my stash corner. And like they were like, there's no way you're catching this much because like you're either using a gun or like your bird's just that badass. I just had like that much of a badass bird. Like, that's just like, I forget his name. He was a little like 230 gram Apamata. Like he was like badass little bird. So I did that job for 36 days, came back, and I'm like, you know what? I love that so much. And I don't really like what I'm doing at these resorts because I'm not making a huge difference. Let's go ahead and do something of my own. So I ended up...
If you guys do hear in the background right now, those are Bladen's youngins, Bladen's kids.
Just screaming toddlers. What are you going to do?
It's all right.
But
just so you guys know.
Yeah. Just ended up starting that company after I got back from that whole excursion out there in Washington.
Awesome. So that's where Desert Kings Falconry began.
Yes, sir.
That is so
sir.
cool.
Yes, sir.
Did you have that name picked out right away? Or?
No, so I actually founded the company with an ex-business partner of mine who, at the time, we called it Benson Falconry. That's my last name. We didn't like that so much. We're like, it's okay. And then my business partner at the time, he was like, hey, how about Desert Kings Falconry? I mean, we're in the desert. We're the king. We're doing the sport of kings, and we're practicing falconry. I'm like, you know what? That should stick for a while, and it has since we started.
I like it.
It's not bad.
Yeah,
it's not bad.
It's a really cool name.
Yeah, it's got a good ring to it.
Yeah, some of these falconry-based abatements company names are really cool.
They're actually
like
good.
Airstrike
Falcon
or
Force. I love
Falcon Force.
I love that
Yeah,
name.
there's a lot of really
That's
cool
really
names.
good.
I think Desert Kings Falconry fits right in there with a lot of them. Is a great name. So when you first got this going, what was it like starting out fresh falconry-based abatement company?
We started December 19th of 2019. We landed our first major contract with a resort removing pigeons and scaring off grackle March 10th of 2020. March 15th or 17th, COVID hit. Big scare.
Pretty much, yeah.
The big scare. Lost everything. All the contracts we had. Yeah, we lost that big, huge resort contract. And I had just had my firstborn in January. Just quit a good paying job with Sonoran Desert. It was scary. It was scary. A lot like I'm so grateful for it though, because what it ended up doing was pushing our focus away from resorts and started focusing on commercial and residential with pigeons. And we actually exploded during COVID because everyone was at home and we would just go door to door with a hawk on our hand and no one turned us away because they were like, I just want to see the hawk. Like, we'll hire you, just bring the freaking hawk out. And I'm like, sure, dude, whatever, man. And then commercial started hitting big because people were gone from these huge commercial contracts and the pigeons were moving in. There was no one scaring them away from nesting on the balconies of the porches or on their nice signs above their business. So then we started getting calls and took off from there. We've just exploded every year. We've doubled in size every year since starting. So
that is awesome. Well, thank you so much for that whole story. I learned quite a few things I didn't know actually today.
Good.
So
yeah.
that was a pretty amazing story. Is there anything else that you want to, I guess, add this podcast here tonight?
Other than we're really changing, hopefully we're changing falconry out here. I think we are. Even though we're not practicing falconry necessarily, we're using falconry-based techniques. And we just want to show people, especially the young people who are getting into falconry that there are different ways to be hunting and flying a bird and making sure that bird's healthy and happy, other than driving an hour out to a big field in the middle of nowhere trying to hunt, even though you've got your wife back at home screaming at you, kids, you got your job and everything else you're doing. There are other ways to have fun and to quote-unquote practice falconry. I mean, your bird doesn't care. Bird just wants to catch stuff. Bird does not care at all. And, and hopefully we're going to teach people that in the coming future.
Awesome. You want to tell those listening where we can find Desert Kings Falconry?
Yes, sir. You can go on to desertkingsfalconry.com or you can go on Instagram, Desert Kings Falconry. Guys, we have a bunch of awesome videos on there. We have an awesome website that was just created for us by Creative Influence. And our social media, especially our Instagram, is just blowing up. I mean, you want to learn what we do, you want to see what we do, go on our Instagram, and you're going to see that stuff.
Awesome. Make sure you guys go and follow their Instagram. Again, it's at Desert Kings Falconry. Really fun. It's a lot of action-packed stuff. So if you want to see those hawks catching pigeons like at night with the flashlights and stuff, they got it all on there. So it's really cool to scroll through there and see that. So definitely check that out, guys. Well, again, thank you so much for being here tonight, Bladen.
Of course.
It was a wonderful time talking to you. We're going to have you on for the next few episodes at least, so I'm excited to get into some more topics and talk more about your experiences and some of the other experiences of other guys that work in Desert Kings Falconry. Thank you so much for listening to the whole podcast, guys. I don't think I have anything else to add to that, so again, just thank you. Have a wonderful night, and we'll see you next time.